There are just 3 weeks until the midterms. And in the flurry of polls that are coming out, one this week stood out, got a lot of attention. The New York Times and Siena College released data that showed among voters surveyed, not only are Republicans up by 4 points on the generic congressional ballot, if the election were held today, a 5 percentage point improvement from last month when Democrats had a 1-point advantage over the GOP. The biggest, most surprising change to cause this swing came from independent women. As the Times points out, last month they favored Democrats by 14 points. Now they're backing Republicans by 18 points. A massive swing. This comes despite Democrats pushing hard, but maybe not hard enough, on the ongoing threat that Republicans pose to women's rights, women's reproductive rights. This poll has certainly set off some alarm bells amongst liberals, progressives, Democrats, but there's been criticism of it too. For one thing, because other polls are not showing the same results. A Morning Consult poll, also from this week, found that it's the Democrats who have a 3 percentage point advantage over Republicans on the generic congressional ballot, and that lead has been pretty consistent over the last few weeks, says Morning Consult. And this poll, by the way, surveyed 8,000 people, 8,000 likely voters, compared to the fewer than 800 that the Times and Siena College talked to. That is important to note. And look, no matter how disturbing that New York Times survey is, we also know that polls haven't always translated into election results. So it's not time to just count Democrats out. They could, just maybe, come out of this okay, kind of okay. The question is, how do they keep the attention on Republicans and expose their Republican opponents for the extremists that many of them really are? Well, there were 3 big debates on Monday night where we got a taste of how the Democrat strategy in different states is playing out. Joining me now to discuss each of those debates and those races is MSNBC political analyst Cornel Belcher. He's also president of the polling firm Brilliant Corners Research, a firm that played a role in getting Barack Obama elected as president in 2008 and 2012. Cornel, thanks so much for coming back on the show. One of the most crucial races that's in play right now is Ohio, the Ohio Senate race. We had a debate in Ohio last night. Republican J.D. Vance has a narrow lead right now over Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan. Have a listen to something that Ryan's team has been sharing from that debate, a clip of Vance talking about exceptions or no exceptions for abortion.
I know a lot of pro-life people. I know people who've been pro-life since before I was born. One of the things they will tell you is they support an exception in the case of incest, for example. I've heard a number of pro-life people say that. But an incest exception looks different at 3 weeks of pregnancy versus 39 weeks of pregnancy.
Wow. Wow. Pretty extreme stuff there. Cornel, Democrats have been pushing the abortion issue as their main focus. They're hoping that's what will bring people to the polls. Looking at Ohio, though, this not-so-swingy state anymore, do you think Vance's comments are going to hurt him the way the Ryan camp is hoping? Or is Ohio just a Trump-red state now, and this is Vance's election to lose?
Well, first, thanks for having me back on the show. Love your show. But I got to start with the poll, because as a pollster, and to really sort of try to, more educate our viewers about what's going on in polls, because sometimes you'll see a headline and it'll say, J.D. Vance leading the race in Ohio, and a lot of people think, well, J.D. Vance is leading the race in Ohio, that means J.D. Vance is going to win the race. And that's not what that means at all. As you said, polls don't determine the outcomes of races. And what's interesting about the New York Times poll is one of the things you pointed out, among independent women, they had a 30-point swing among independent women in a very short period of time. Look, I've been polling a long time, and you don't get 30-point swings from one direction to another direction in a very short period of time. Probably what's likely is happening is something is going on, or something is different about their sample. And I know we could do a whole show on this, so I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on this. But my point is, the poll is as good as what you are guessing the likely universe of voters are going to be. And what you see is, some polls have tighter likely voter screens, some do not. But what I want to press to people is, we are going into an election unlike anything we've seen even before.
Yes.
I mean, just the news out right now is showing that there's more people have early voted, more African Americans have early voted already in Georgia at this point in time than they had at this point in time in a presidential election year, which you never see. And coming on the heels of 2018, which was an outlier to 2010. The president's first midterm, you saw enormous turnout among younger voters and voters of color. So a poll isn't predicting the future, and quite frankly, we should spend a lot less time covering polls, and I'm a pollster, a lot more time covering the issues. Now, I know that's not what you asked me, but I had to go in. I apologize on the polling.
No, I appreciate you breaking down the polls for us. That's why we love having you on the show. Okay, but now talk Ohio.
now Ohio. Well, first, full transparency. Tim Ryan is not only, I think, a great candidate, but also a personal friend. I know Congressman Ryan. But Ohio has been a tough state for Democrats. What you have in Ohio is unlike what you see in Georgia, which I know we're going to talk about as well. You have an electorate in Georgia that is growing more diverse, and you have big pockets of upwardly, higher education attainment voters, which you need in the sweet spots in these states. Ohio is a state that it is growing older and, quite frankly, more blue collar, which is a tough recipe for Democrats. But you also see there that you do have a Democratic senator from Ohio, so there's a breakthrough in Ohio. What these polls don't show is the energy, I think, that's around Tim Ryan's race. And can Tim Ryan pull out that and energize that same base of sporadic voters that we saw Barack Obama do once upon a time in Ohio and change the face of the electorate in Ohio? The other thing here is the gender gap. Look, part of the issue that a lot of folks had with the New York Times poll is that they basically had no gender gap. And so we're to believe that, despite the preponderance of evidence, that women voters are going to break just as much Republican this time around as Democrat. And there's an overwhelming preponderance of data that says that that's just not happening. Also, just your common sense. And when you look at J.D. Vance's answer there, does that help or hurt him with women voters? And that absolutely hurts him with women voters.
So let me talk about Utah now. We know this one's going to be close there. Senate race. Republican Senator Mike Lee has a bit of an edge over independent Evan McMullin, a former Republican who Lee actually voted for in the 2016 presidential election. Last night in the debate, Mike Lee tried to say that he supports the Electoral College, but it was couched by, starting to bring up the big lie, ballot harvesting, voter fraud, all that nonsense. He also held up his pocket constitution at one point. And Evan McMullin shot back, Cornell. Have a listen.
Senator Lee has been doing this thing with his pocket constitution for the last several years. Senator Lee, it is not a prop. For you to talk about the importance of the Electoral College, I think is rich. I think you know exactly how important it is. And I think you knew how important it was when you sought to urge the White House that had lost an election to find fake electors to overturn the will of the people. Senator Lee, that was the most egregious betrayal of our nation's Constitution in its history by a U.S. Senator, I believe, and it will be your legacy.
Cornell, is that going to hurt Lee in your view? Because there is this big debate. How much should Democrats lean into defending democracy, going after the 1-6 insurrection?
Yeah. Look, every campaign is different, and their strategic imperatives are different. What you clearly see happening in Utah is that they understand that voters there, moderate middle voters there, are quite frankly upset and uncomfortable with the ideal of their government being overthrown, and that Lee was plotting behind the scenes to actually do that. So it's a strong hit. I also want to point out here that, look, Utah is not a swing state, and that you have a Republican, in a very, very deeply red state, Republican senator up for re-election in trouble in that state, I think speaks volumes to, quite frankly, how effective a hit it is.
I just want to remind our viewers that Lee won that state by more than 40 points in 2016 against a Democrat. There is no Democrat running this time. Last question for you, Cornel. One of the most closely watched gubernatorial races is in Georgia, where Republican Governor Brian Kemp is leading his Democratic challenger Stacey Abrams by several percentage points. Let's have a listen to Abrams on Monday night calling out Kemp over gun laws.
There's a federal background check on every individual that buys a firearm in the United States of America.
Which shouldn't exist either.
That is not true.
Well, the point,
Mr.
I
Kemp,
understand,
that's not true.
I understand the point you're making, but the point is, when you buy a firearm, you get a background check.
Mr.
And
Kemp,
none of the laws
More
changed.
Mr. Kemp, if you purchase a weapon in Georgia through a gun sale or a private sale,
Well,
through a
Mr.
gun
Abrams,
show or a
I
private sale, you're not
All right,
subject
we're
to that.
going to have to move on.
Democrats, Cornel, have been attacked on crime by the GOP, but they've attacked back on gun control. Did Abrams do what she needed to last night, especially on this issue, to try and cut Kemp's pretty consistent poll lead over her?
Yeah. Well, she has to go on the attack, right? And it is fairly consistent.
As entrepreneurs in the days ahead.
Sorry, hearing background. She has to go. She has to go on the attack and land some hits on him because in all the polling he seems to be ahead. Connecting the gun issue with issues of safety has shown to be a winning way to talk about guns and safety for Democrats, and particularly with women voters who think, quite frankly, there are far too many guns in our communities and far too easy, and the access to these guns is too easy, and they're actually looking for reform. But I think it's a smart play on her part to try to connect guns and safety and hit the governor with it.